I am Julian, 26 years old. 4 years ago, my own father officially suspended me from my own home because I absolutely refused to apologize to my golden child brother. While I was standing there, staring at the shattered remains of my life's hard work spread across the hardwood floor, my parents looked me dead in the eye and told me I was a violent monster. They humiliated me, they cornered me, and they demanded I get on my knees and beg for forgiveness from the spoiled boy who had just maliciously destroyed my future. They thought they held all the power in that sterile, upper-middle-class living room. They thought I would break just like I always did. But there is one thing they did not know. They had absolutely no idea that I had already secured a secret safety net, and they certainly did not know that my quiet, immediate departure would trigger a massive chain reaction ending in their total financial, legal, and social ruin. And now, the exact same people who threw me away like garbage are desperately begging for a seat at my table. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect little suburban illusion, please hit that like button if you truly believe in justice. And do not forget to tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. I always love seeing how far these stories travel, especially when we talk about surviving toxic families. Now, let us go back to the exact moment my entire world finally snapped. It happened on a Tuesday. It was the kind of heavy, humid summer afternoon in the suburbs where the central air conditioning in our sprawling house was blasting at full capacity. Yet the air inside the living room felt thick enough to choke on. I was 22 at the time. I stood in the dead center of the expensive Persian rug. This was a space that was supposed to be designed for cozy family movie nights and holiday gatherings, but currently, it felt exactly like a criminal courtroom where the verdict had been decided long before the trial even began. My father, Victor, sat in his oversized leather recliner. It was his throne. Nobody else was allowed to sit in it. His face was a deep shade of purple, the kind of coloring that usually accompanied a dangerous spike in his blood pressure. His knuckles were bone white as he gripped the armrests, his wedding ring clinking against the wood. He wore a crisp, tailored dress shirt, desperate to maintain his image of corporate authority even inside the walls of his own home. He was a middle manager at a regional insurance firm, but he acted like he was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. My mother, Helen, sat perched on the very edge of the cream-colored sofa. She was clutching a decorative throw pillow so tightly her fingers were trembling. Her eyes darted everywhere, at the ceiling, at the television, at the mantel, everywhere except at me. She was the grand enabler, the woman who would watch a house burn down and compliment the warmth of the flames just to avoid a confrontation. And then there was Gavin, my younger brother, 19 years old, standing over 6 feet tall, currently hiding a malicious, arrogant smirk behind his hand while dramatically rubbing his left shoulder, as if he had just survived a brutal assault in a dark alley. He was the golden child, the masterpiece, the boy who could do no wrong, even when his hands were caught dripping in the evidence. "I am waiting, Julian," my father barked. His voice was a low, terrifying rumble, the warning thunder before a massive lightning strike. "Apologize to your brother, right now." The silence in the room was absolute and suffocating. You could literally hear the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, a piece of furniture they had bought from an estate sale just to look like old money. I looked at Gavin. I saw the glint in his pale eyes. It was that familiar, triumphant sparkle that screamed he had won yet again. He thrived on this. He lived for the moments when he could weaponize our parents against me. I looked at my mother. I silently willed her to speak up, to be a mother, to tell the truth about what had actually happened upstairs just a few hours prior. She knew the truth, but she just smoothed the fabric of her expensive designer skirt and stared intently at the floorboards, completely abandoning me to the wolves. "No," I said. My voice did not shake. That surprised even me. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird desperately trying to escape a cage, but the word came out steady, flat, and ice-cold. My father's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. He stood up slowly, deliberately using his height to try and intimidate me. It was a classic psychological tactic that had worked flawlessly during my entire childhood. He would tower over me, projecting his anger until I crumbled into apologies for things I never even did. But I was 22 now. I was a grown man who worked for a living. I was not a terrified little boy anymore. "Excuse me?" Victor stepped closer, his chest puffed out like a silverback gorilla defending its territory. "What did you just say to me in my own house?" "I said no," I repeated, maintaining direct eye contact. I refused to blink. "I am not apologizing for something I did not do wrong. Gavin destroyed my property. He attacked me in my room. I defended myself. I am not sorry for a single second of it." My mother finally chimed in, her voice shrill, panicky, and dripping with misplaced accusation. "You grabbed your brother, Julian. You shoved him into the hallway. He could have broken a bone. We could be facing a massive lawsuit if this happened outside this house. Do you know how much a personal injury lawyer costs? I physically escorted him out after he maliciously smashed my final engineering project." I corrected her, keeping my voice remarkably even, though I knew full well it was a massive waste of breath. Facts did not matter in the Turner household. And he did not break a single bone. He is perfectly fine. Look at him, Mom. He is practically laughing at us. Gavin immediately dropped the smirk. He widened his eyes, contorted his face in mock agony, and winced, clutching his shoulder harder. "It really hurts, Dad." He twisted it so hard. "I think I need to go to the emergency room. He might have torn my rotator cuff." It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. If I had not been the direct victim of his malice, I might have given him a standing ovation for his sheer commitment to the lie. Victor took a deep, rattling breath, puffing out his chest even further. "I do not care about your little school toys, Julian. I care about respect. I care about the hierarchy and the rules in this house. You are the older brother. You are supposed to be the mature one, the example. Since you completely refuse to act like a part of this family, you will not be treated like one." He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger right at the center of my face. "Fine. You are suspended." I blinked, genuinely confused by the bizarre terminology. "Suspended? From what? This is not a high school." "From this house?" Victor spat, his face inches from mine, his breath smelling of stale coffee and mints. "You are grounded indefinitely. No cell phone, no laptop, no car privileges. You do not leave your room except for meals and to use the bathroom. You do not speak to anyone in this family. You sit up there in silence and you think about your violent, erratic behavior until you are ready to come down here and give your brother a sincere, groveling apology. So if I never apologize for a crime I didn't commit, I stay suspended forever?" I asked flatly, testing the boundaries of his delusion. "That is your choice?" Victor crossed his arms, looking unbelievably smug, like a judge who had just handed down a brilliant sentence. "You want to act like a violent thug, you get treated like a prisoner. This is entirely on you, Julian. The ball is in your court." I took a slow, deep breath and looked around that pristine, suffocating room one last time. I looked at the framed family photos perfectly arranged on the stone mantel. There was Gavin holding up a tennis trophy. Gavin smiling brightly at his expensive high school graduation. My parents posing on a luxury cruise they took last summer. There was not a single photograph of me in that entire room. I was a ghost in my own home. I looked at Victor, a man who valued his fragile ego and his neighborhood reputation far more than the objective truth. I looked at Helen, whose love was strictly conditional upon my total silence and absolute submission. And right then, something deep inside my chest finally snapped. It was not a loud, rage-filled explosion. It was not a screaming match. It was the quiet, definitive, heavy sound of a steel chain breaking. The very last thread of hope that they would ever treat me like a human being, let alone a son, dissolved into nothingness. A strange, powerful, almost intoxicating calm washed over my entire body. It was the crystal-clear clarity of a man who realizes he has absolutely nothing left to lose. "All right," I said. Victor looked stunned. His mouth actually fell open slightly, He had fully expected a war. He had expected me to yell, to cry, to bargain, or to eventually cave in just to make the psychological torture stop. That was the established script we had played out for 2 decades. I fight, they gang up, I surrender. All right? He repeated, his corporate mask slipping into pure, unadulterated confusion. You want my phone? I reached into the pocket of my jeans, pulled out the device. I paid the monthly bill for myself out of my retail salary, and placed it gently on the glass coffee table. Here. And the laptop? Victor demanded, desperately trying to recover his slipping authority, his voice raising half an octave. I walked over to the hallway console table where my heavy backpack sat. I unzipped it, pulled out the beat-up laptop I used for my engineering schematics, and walked back to set it right next to the phone. Done. Good. Victor puffed his chest out again, convincing himself he had won the battle. Now go to your room. Think about your actions. Gavin let out a small, satisfied huff of air. Helen let out a long breath, visibly relieved that the shouting was over and the perfect aesthetic of the house was restored. I did not say another word. I turned my back on them and walked up the carpeted stairs. I did not stomp my feet. I did not slam my bedroom door in a fit of teenage angst. I closed it with a soft, gentle, definitive click. They honestly thought I was going into solitary confinement to break down and cry. They thought they had successfully disciplined their unruly asset. They had absolutely no idea that when I said, all right, I did not mean I submit. I meant I am done. I meant I was about to burn their entire script to ash. To truly understand the gravity of why I locked my bedroom door that afternoon and immediately began packing my life into a faded canvas duffel bag, you have to understand the exact sequence of events that had transpired exactly 24 hours earlier. You have to see how my family expertly twisted reality until I became the vicious villain in a story where I was the only casualty. I was 22 years old, working a grueling, back-breaking retail job at a local hardware store while putting myself through an intensive vocational program for mechanical engineering. I did not get the luxury of a full ride to a pristine university like Gavin. I had to earn every single credit hour with my own sweat. My final capstone project was a complex, fully functional hydraulic mechanical arm. I had conceptualized, designed, and built it completely from scratch over 3 agonizing months. It was delicate, highly precise work involving custom-molded plastics, intricate fluid lines, and a custom-wired motherboard. It was the project that would determine my final grade, secure my engineering certification, and potentially land me a high-paying salary in the real world. It was my golden ticket out of that toxic house. It was Monday evening. I was sitting at my cramped desk, the harsh light of my desk lamp illuminating the circuit board. I was holding a hot soldering iron, carefully connecting the final wires to the processor. My bedroom door was firmly closed. I was deeply in the zone, my hands steady, my mind focused entirely on securing my future. Then, the door banged open so hard the handle left a dent in the drywall. No knock, no warning, no basic human respect. Gavin simply barged in like he owned the square footage I practically paid rent to exist in. I need your laptop, he announced loudly, completely shattering my concentration. I did not look up from the soldering iron. The tip was over 600 degrees. No. Mine is completely dead and I lost the charger again, he complained, walking over and hovering right next to my elbow, crowding my space. Come on, Julian. Give it to me. I need to log in to my game before the daily server reset. My guild is waiting. I am actively using it for my final schematics right now. Gavin, I said firmly. My eyes locked on the tiny wire I was bonding. Get out of my room. You were just looking at a static PDF, he whined, his voice taking on that irritating, nasal tone he used whenever he was denied something. Just print it out. Give me the laptop. He reached directly across my desk for the keyboard. I blocked his hand with my forearm, pushing him back. I said no. Go find your charger. Leave my room. You are such a selfish, pathetic loser, Gavin sneered, his face contorting into an ugly, spoiled scowl. Mom said you have to share everything with me. You live under her roof. Mom is not in here, and this is my professional work. It is for my certification. Now get out." Gavin did not like the word no. In his entire 19 years of existence, he practically never heard it. Not from Helen, who treated him like a fragile prince, not from Victor, who saw Gavin as the athletic extension of his own failed youth, and certainly not from the expensive private school they paid out the nose for. Hearing the word no from me, the designated scapegoat of the family, was a direct insult to his golden existence. "Fine." His voice dropped to a sinister whisper. "If I cannot play, you cannot work." Before I could even register his sudden movement, Gavin reached past my blocking arm, grabbed the central frame of my hydraulic model, and lifted it off the desk. "Gavin, stop!" I shouted, dropping the hot soldering iron onto the heat-resistant desk mat. He looked me dead in the eye, flashed a sickeningly sweet smile, and hurled the model onto the hardwood floor with all his strength. It did not just drop. He threw it. The custom plastic casing shattered into a dozen jagged, irreparable pieces. The pressurized hydraulic fluid lines burst open immediately, spilling thick, oily liquid across the rug. The circuit board I had just spent 6 hours meticulously wiring cracked straight down the middle, the green fiberglass splintering. 3 months of sleepless nights, hundreds of dollars in raw materials, and my entire future. Gone in a single, malicious second. The sound of the crunching plastic made me physically nauseous. I stared at the wreckage, my brain utterly unable to process the sheer cruelty of the act. "Oops," Gavin said, laughing lightly, stepping over a pool of hydraulic fluid. "Guess you should have given me the laptop, college boy." My vision actually went red. A primal surge of pure adrenaline flooded my veins. I wanted to hit him. God, I wanted to lay him out right there on the floor next to my ruined project. But I knew physical violence was a death sentence in that house. It would only validate their narrative that I was unstable. Instead, I grabbed him by the upper arm, spun him around, and marched him toward the doorway. I was far stronger than him from years of lifting heavy boxes and mixing cement at the hardware store. "Get out," I growled, shoving him firmly into the hallway. It was not a violent throw. It was the physical, necessary removal of a trespasser who had just destroyed my property. But Gavin knew how to play the victim card better than a seasoned Hollywood actor. As soon as his expensive sneakers crossed the threshold, he deliberately threw his own weight backward, tangled his feet, and slammed his shoulder into the drywall in the hallway. He slid down to the floor, clutching his arm, and let out a blood-curdling theatrical scream. "My arm! Ow! Mom! Dad! Julian is attacking me!" The response was instantaneous. Thundering footsteps echoed up the stairs. Helen appeared first, gasping in absolute horror, her hands flying to her face. Victor was right behind her, his face already contorted in a rage so deep the veins in his neck were bulging. "What in the world is going on here?" Victor bellowed, his voice echoing in the tight hallway. "He attacked me?" Gavin wailed, squeezing out genuine-looking crocodile tears, rocking back and forth. "I just asked nicely to borrow a phone charger and he went totally crazy. He grabbed me and threw me against the wall. He is a psycho." "I absolutely did not," I yelled, pointing frantically back into my room. "Look at the floor. Look at what he did. He came in here and purposefully destroyed my capstone project because I would not let him play video games on my laptop." Helen did not even glance into my room. She did not look at the shattered plastic or the spilled fluid. She dropped to her knees right beside Gavin, wrapping her arms around him and cooing like he was a wounded soldier on a battlefield. "Oh, my poor baby." "Victor, look at his shoulder. It is already turning red." "Julian, what is mentally wrong with you? Why are you so aggressive? Look at the project, Dad," I pleaded, stepping backward into my room, my voice cracking with desperation. "It is completely ruined. That is my certification. That is my career. I do not care about your little mechanical toys," Victor roared, stepping aggressively into my personal space, forcing me to back up. "You put your hands on your younger brother." You are an animal. Look at him. He is terrified of you. I looked down at Gavin. He had his face buried in Helen's shoulder, shaking with fake sobs. But for one brief, sickening second, as Helen stroked his hair, he peeked out from behind her sweater, met my eyes and winked at me. That single, deliberate wink told me everything I ever needed to know about my place in the Turner family. The objective truth did not matter. The physical evidence of my destroyed project did not matter. The narrative was already written, edited, and signed into law. Gavin was the innocent, fragile victim, and I was the violent, jealous monster. But the destruction of my project was only the spark that lit the powder keg. The real reason my bags were packed, the real reason my heart was completely numb to their threats, stemmed from a much darker, far more unforgivable betrayal exactly 6 months prior. It was a cold evening in December. I had come home early from a double shift at the hardware store because a snowstorm had shut down the roads. The house was dead quiet, but as I walked past Victor's home office, I heard hushed, panicked voices. The door was slightly ajar. "We absolutely have to pay it, Victor," Helen was whispering frantically. "If we do not wire the funds by Friday, the school district is going to press criminal charges. They have security footage." $5,000, Helen? Victor hissed back, sounding panicked. "Where are we supposed to pull $5,000 in liquid cash right now? We are completely leveraged on the real estate mortgage. The credit cards are maxed out from the holidays." "Use the fund," Helen said firmly. I froze in the hallway. I stopped breathing. The floorboards beneath me suddenly felt like thin ice. "The college fund?" Victor asked. "Which one?" "Julian's," Helen replied without a single second of hesitation. It was so casual, so terrifyingly easy. "He is smart. He works hard at that hardware store. He can just take out student loans or work his way through community college. He is resilient. But Gavin needs this nightmare to go away. If he gets a criminal record for vandalism, he will never get accepted into a decent fraternity. It will completely ruin his social standing and his future networking." I stood there, my hand hovering over the doorknob, feeling like someone had driven a jagged knife straight into my stomach and twisted it. Gavin had been caught vandalizing the rival high school's gymnasium a week earlier. He had spray-painted obscenities on their basketball court. Everyone knew about it, but I assumed he was just getting suspended. Apparently, the property damage was severe, and the district was threatening a massive civil lawsuit and police involvement unless immediate restitution was paid. "Julian has been saving that money from his birthday checks, his allowance, and his part-time jobs since he was a literal child," Victor said. He did not sound morally opposed to stealing from me, just hesitant about the logistics of the theft. "He knows exactly how much is in that custodial account. We will just tell him the stock market crashed." Helen dismissed the concern entirely, waving her hand. "Or we will tell him we needed it for emergency roof repairs. He will not question us. He is a loyal boy. He will understand that family comes first." Family comes first. That was the toxic, manipulative weapon they used to bludgeon me into submission my entire life. Family comes first actually translated to Gavin comes first, and Julian pays the price. I quietly backed away from the office, walked out the front door into the freezing snow, and sat in my beat-up Honda Civic for 2 solid hours, staring blankly at the steering wheel while my breath plumed in the freezing air. I never confronted them about the stolen inheritance. I knew exactly how they would spin it. They would call me a selfish, greedy son for caring about a college fund when my own brother was facing a lawsuit. They would gaslight me into believing I was the bad guy for wanting to keep my own money. So I did something else. I stopped trusting them completely. The very next morning, I went to my personal bank branch. I could not touch the custodial account they legally controlled, but I had my own private checking account for my hardware store salary. I withdrew every single penny I had earned over the last 2 years. I pulled out $3,400 in pure, untraceable cash. I stuffed it into a thick brown envelope, sealed it with duct tape, and taped it securely to the underside of the bottom drawer in my bedroom dresser. Cash is king. Cash is safe from fake market crashes, manufactured family emergencies, and predatory parents. And now, sitting in my room after being officially suspended from the family, I reached under that drawer. I felt the thick paper of the envelope. I pulled it out. It was heavy. It was my freedom. The past was dead, and the countdown to my departure had officially begun. I was not just leaving because of the laptop incident. I was not leaving because of a childish, insulting grounding meant for a teenager. I was leaving because my very future was being actively cannibalized to feed my brother's insatiable ego. My college fund was stolen to cover his crimes. My professional reputation in the house was trashed to protect his fragile image. My hard work was a joke to them. I was nothing more than a shock absorber for the Turner family's dysfunction. I pulled my faded canvas duffel bag from the back of the closet. I moved with a cold, calculated efficiency. I packed exactly 3 days' worth of practical clothes, jeans, heavy t-shirts, my thick flannel. I packed my heavy steel-toe work boots and my basic toiletry kit. I didn't take any of the superficial gifts they had given me over the years. I only took what I had bought with my own money. Then, I quietly unlocked my door and crept down the hallway to Victor's home office. He kept a locked filing cabinet in the corner where he stored all the important family documents: deeds, tax returns, insurance policies. He thought he was incredibly clever hiding the tiny brass key inside a fake dictionary on the bookshelf. I had figured that out when I was 14. I retrieved the key, unlocked the cabinet, and sifted through the hanging folders. I extracted my original birth certificate, my social security card, and my passport. I slid them into a waterproof plastic sleeve and placed them safely in the bottom of my duffel bag. I was severing all legal ties. I was making sure they could never hold my identity hostage to force me back. I walked back to my bedroom and stood in the center of the floor. I looked at the empty spot on the desk where my hydraulic arm used to sit. The dark, oily stain of the hydraulic fluid was still soaking into the expensive carpet, a permanent reminder of Gavin's malice. "Family comes first," I whispered to the empty walls, my voice laced with venom. "Well, I am starting my own family. Population, me." I sat in the dark and waited. I watched the glowing red digits of the digital clock on my nightstand slowly tick forward. 10 p.m., 11:30 p.m., 1 a.m. I needed to be absolutely certain the house was dead asleep. At 2 in the morning, the silence in the suburban house was deafening. The only sound was the low hum of the central air conditioning. I slipped into my heavy denim jacket, slung the duffel bag over my shoulder, and opened my bedroom door. The hardwood floorboards in the hallway were notoriously treacherous. I knew every single squeak, every subtle groan of the wood. I had memorized the safe path years ago, originally just to avoid waking Victor up when I came home from late work shifts and triggering one of his infamous lectures on punctuality. Step on the far left edge of the third plank. Skip the fifth step on the main staircase entirely. Hug the drywall tightly when passing the kitchen entryway. I moved like a phantom through the house I had grown up in, a stranger in my own life. I walked past Gavin's bedroom. The door was cracked open, casting a sliver of moonlight across the hallway. I paused. I could hear his soft, rhythmic snoring. He was sleeping soundly, utterly unbothered, safe and protected in his luxury bedding. He was probably dreaming about whatever expensive toy or vacation my parents would buy him next to soothe his fake shoulder injury. For one split second, a surge of adrenaline and fury burned so hot in my chest I actually felt dizzy. My hands balled into tight fists. I wanted to kick his door wide open. I wanted to drag him out of that comfortable bed by his collar and scream the ugly, unvarnished truth right into his smug face. I wanted him to feel the fear of consequence for the very first time in his pampered life. But then I remembered the immense power of the words I had spoken downstairs. All right, anger meant connection. Anger meant I still cared enough to seek validation or revenge. Absolute indifference was the ultimate severance. If I woke him up, if I fought him, I was still playing their twisted game. I was still a participant in their drama. I unclenched my fists, took a deep breath, and walked past his room without breaking my stride. I reached the pristine kitchen downstairs. The moonlight filtered through the custom plantation blinds, illuminating the expensive granite countertops Helen constantly bragged about at every HOA meeting and neighborhood potluck. I pulled a small notepad and a black pen from my jacket pocket. I had debated writing a long, scathing letter. A detailed, multi-page manifesto outlining every stolen dollar from my college fund, every blatant lie, every moment of sickening favoritism, and the immense psychological damage they had inflicted on me. But why bother? They would not read it to understand my pain. They were incapable of self-reflection. They would only scan it to find insults they could use to play the victim later, showing it to their friends to prove how unstable and ungrateful I was. I wrote exactly 5 words. Gone. Do not look for me. I tore the small sheet of paper from the pad and left it resting right next to the designer fruit bowl on the kitchen island. It was the exact spot Helen placed her favorite coffee mug every single morning. She could not possibly miss it. There was no emotion in the handwriting. It was a statement of pure fact. I walked to the heavy oak back door, slipped out into the cool night air, and locked the deadbolt from the outside with my house key. Then, I took the metal key off my ring, bent down, and slid it under the welcome mat. I would never, ever need it again. The summer night air was incredibly crisp. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until they ached. It tasted sweeter and cleaner than any recycled air I had ever breathed inside that toxic mansion. I walked 3 blocks down the quiet, manicured street to where my 2004 Honda Civic was parked under a flickering streetlight. Victor never allowed my ugly, rusted car to sit in the pristine driveway next to Gavin's brand new leased sports car and Victor's corporate SUV. He claimed it was an eyesore that would lower the neighborhood property values and make us look like trash. I always had to park it out of sight. I threw my duffel bag into the passenger seat and slid behind the steering wheel. I put the key in the ignition, but I hesitated for just 1 second. Was I really doing this? I was 22 years old. I had exactly $3,400 to my name in a paper envelope. I had no completed college degree yet. I had no apartment. I had no safety net. I was technically, as of this moment, homeless. This was reckless. This was financial suicide. If I failed, I would have nothing. I looked in the rearview mirror at the distant silhouette of my parents' house. It stood dark and silent against the night sky, a towering monument to my insignificance. A house built on lies, stolen inheritance, and broken promises. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, choked, and finally roared to life. It was a loud, obnoxious engine. But to me, it sounded like a choir of angels singing the song of pure freedom. I shifted into drive, pulled away from the curb, and drove out of the subdivision. I did not look back. I drove aimlessly for the first 45 minutes. I just needed to put physical highway miles between me and that neighborhood. I drove past the glowing signs of 24-hour diners and empty strip malls. But as the initial adrenaline began to fade, stark reality set in with the force of a physical blow. Where was I going to sleep tonight? I could not crash on a friend's couch. In my upscale, gossipy neighborhood, parents talked constantly. Someone's mother would immediately call Helen to report my whereabouts, and Victor would show up with the local police, claiming I was having a severe mental breakdown and needed to be brought home for my own safety. I could not afford to stay in a decent hotel for more than a few weeks before my cash reserves drained dry. Then, an old, buried memory surfaced in my mind. Uncle Garrett. Garrett was Victor's older brother, the absolute black sheep of the Turner family. While Victor wore tailored suits, obsessed over his real estate investments, and worked as a middle manager in corporate insurance, Garrett wore grease-stained coveralls and ran a gritty, independent mechanic shop on the industrial south side of the city. Victor absolutely despised Garrett. He openly mocked him at Thanksgiving dinners, calling him a crude, uneducated failure who lacked ambition. He wastes his pathetic life fixing other people's broken mistakes, Victor used to say with a condescending sneer, sipping his expensive wine. Consequently, Garrett was eventually banned from all family gatherings. They simply stopped inviting him and he stopped trying to come. But I always liked Garrett. During the rare holidays when I was a kid, before the final banishment, Garrett was the only adult in the room who treated me like a human being. While Victor and Helen paraded Gavin around like a show dog, Garrett would sit with me on the porch. He asked me how engines worked, not what my grades were. He showed me how to use a socket wrench and told me that a man's worth was measured by the calluses on his hands, not the balance in his bank account. It was a massive long shot. I had not spoken to the man in 5 long years, but it was the only shot I had. I merged onto the interstate and headed toward the south side. As I drove, the manicured lawns, gated communities, and luxury car dealerships faded away. They were replaced by chain-link fences, flickering streetlights, abandoned storefronts, and massive concrete warehouses. I pulled up to Garrett's auto repair just after 3 in the morning. It was a rough, cinder-block building surrounded by a massive dirt lot filled with cars in various states of decay. There was a tiny, attached apartment above the main garage bay with a single, dark window. I parked across the street, locked my doors, leaned the seat back, and waited. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by something much stronger: determination. I was going to build my own life, even if I had to build it out of scrap metal and grease. At exactly 6 in the morning, the harsh fluorescent lights inside the garage flickered on with a loud, electric buzz that cut through the quiet dawn. A moment later, the massive corrugated metal bay door rolled up, rattling like a freight train on loose tracks. Uncle Garrett walked out onto the cracked concrete pad. He was holding a chipped ceramic mug of coffee, wearing heavy gray coveralls deeply stained with years of motor oil and transmission fluid. He looked older than I remembered from those childhood Thanksgivings. His beard was completely silver, and his face was lined with deep wrinkles from years of squinting into dark engine bays and dealing with difficult customers. But despite the age, he looked incredibly solid. He looked real. Unlike my father, who always looked like he was wearing a costume, Garrett looked like a man who belonged exactly where he was. I took a deep, steadying breath, grabbed my heavy canvas bag from the passenger seat, and stepped out of the Civic. I walked across the quiet street, my boots crunching on the gravel of his lot. Garrett was kneeling beside a rusted Ford F-150, checking the tire pressure with a worn gauge. He did not look up when he heard me approach. "We open at 8, buddy," he grunted, his voice gravelly and thick with sleep. "Unless you are actively bleeding to death or your engine block is on fire, come back in 2 hours. "I am not bleeding," I said, my voice tight but steady. "But my life might be on fire." Garrett froze. He dropped the tire gauge into his pocket and slowly stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. He squinted against the harsh morning sun, staring at me, tilting his head as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Julian, is that really you under all that gloom?" "Hey, Uncle Garrett, it's been a while." He wiped his thick, calloused hands on the dirty red rag and walked over. His sharp, perceptive eyes scanned me from head to toe. He noted the heavy duffel bag gripping my shoulder, the tension in my jaw. He saw the dark, exhausted circles under my eyes. He looked across the street and recognized my pathetic, rusted Honda Civic, the car Victor was so ashamed of. "You look like absolute hell, kid," he said bluntly, no sugarcoating. "You drink coffee? Black, please." He nodded toward the garage office. "Follow me." The office smelled intensely of old rubber, gasoline, and burnt coffee. It was beautifully chaotic. There were stacks of unpaid invoices, loose spark plugs, and greasy car parts scattered across the laminate counter. But it felt incredibly warm and alive. It was the exact opposite of the sterile, museum-like perfection of Helen's living room, where leaving a coaster out of place was a punishable offense. Garrett poured me a mug of black sludge from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the 90s. He pointed to a torn vinyl chair in the corner. "Sit down. Talk. Give me the whole ugly truth." So I talked. I laid everything out on the table, holding nothing back. I told him about the hydraulic engineering project, the months of work, and Gavin's deliberate malicious sabotage. I told him about the fake assault accusation and Gavin's Oscar-worthy performance. I told him about Victor suspending me from the house, treating a 22-year-old man like an errant toddler. And finally, I told him about the stolen $5,000 college fund. I explained how they justified raiding my inheritance to pay for Gavin's vandalism lawsuit, all under the guise of family comes first. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice in anger. I simply delivered the cold, hard facts as if I were diagnosing a blown transmission to a customer. When I finished the part about Victor grounding a 22-year-old man, Garrett actually threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, barking, genuine laugh that echoed off the cinder-block walls of the small office. "He suspended you?" Garrett shook his head, leaning back in his squeaky desk chair, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "From a house you pay rent to live in? That sounds exactly like Victor. The man genuinely believes he is running a Fortune 500 corporation, not a family. He thinks he can issue write-ups to his own children. That is the dumbest thing I have heard since a guy tried to weld a gas tank while smoking a cigar in my bay." "I just could not take the mental gymnastics anymore," I said, staring down into my coffee mug, watching the dark liquid swirl. I looked at them, I said, "All right," and I walked out. I am never going back. I am completely done. Garrett's expression instantly sobered. The amusement vanished, replaced by a deep, profound understanding. He leaned forward, resting his massive forearms on the cluttered desk. "You said all right?" "Just that." He paused, studying my face. "That is powerful, Julian. Silence terrifies narcissistic people like your father way more than screaming does. Screaming validates their power, proves they can control your emotions. Silence completely erases them. It starves them of the drama they feed on." He took a slow sip of his coffee. "So what is the grand plan now? Because you can't live in that Civic forever. I have some cash saved up. 3 grand safe in a bag. I need a job. I need a place to crash until I finish studying for my engineering certification exams. I am good with my hands. I worked at the hardware store for 4 years. I understand basic mechanics, and I learn fast." Garrett looked at my hands. He noted the fresh burn marks from the soldering iron and the thick calluses on my palms from lifting lumber. He nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied. "I cannot pay you a massive salary to start. Minimum wage under the table for now until we get you on the official payroll. But I desperately need a guy I can trust. My last apprentice quit to go work at a fancy corporate dealership downtown because he wanted to wear a clean polo shirt and scam people into buying expensive air filters they don't need. Here, we actually fix cars. We do honest, dirty work. We don't upsell and we don't lie." "I will take it," I said without a microsecond of hesitation. "You will learn. You will get filthy. You will go home smelling like exhaust and oil every single day of your life. And you will sleep in the spare room above the garage. It has a cot, a mini fridge, a hot plate, and a working shower. It is definitely not your mother's palace. But the rent is free if you pull your weight in the bays." I felt a massive lump form in my throat. The sheer, uncomplicated kindness of this man, the man my father repeatedly called a monster and a failure, was overwhelming. "Why are you helping me, Garrett? Victor always told me you hated our guts. He said you were jealous of his success." Garrett's eyes hardened, flashing with an old, deep pain that told a story of decades of betrayal. "I do not hate you, Julian. I hate your father's disgusting pretension. I hate how he uses people to build his fake empire and discards them when they don't fit his aesthetic. But mostly, I am helping you because I see exactly who you are. You are the black sheep now. And us black sheep, we have to stick together to survive. The wolves always eat the strays." He stood up, grabbed a heavy wrench from the desk, and tossed me a clean rag. "Finish your sludge. Your shift starts in 10 minutes. My foreman, Bruce, is going to chew you up and spit you out. Do not let him break you." "I won't." That morning, I put on a pair of oversized, stiff coveralls. For the first time in my adult life, I was no longer Julian the scapegoat. I was no longer Julian the disappointment or the punching bag. I was just the new guy who needed to learn how to rebuild a carburetor. The physical labor was brutal. Bruce was a 50-year-old giant built like a brick wall, with zero patience and a vocabulary consisting entirely of grunts, curses, and insults. He was the hardest man I had ever met. "You are holding that socket wrench like a damn pencil, college boy," Bruce barked on my second day, watching me struggle with a rusted bolt on a Chevy transmission. "Hold it like a weapon. The machine fights back. You fight harder." I adjusted my grip, gritting my teeth, putting my shoulder into the leverage, and the bolt finally cracked loose with a loud pop. "And do not rush," Bruce scolded later that afternoon, slapping the fender of a car. "Fast is for the corporate dealerships. Fast is for screw-ups who want a malpractice lawsuit. Here we do it right. If you strip that drain plug because you want to go home early, you are buying the new oil pan out of your own salary. Do it right, not fast. Do it right, not fast." That phrase became my absolute religion over the next few months. It was the absolute antithesis of my life with Victor and Helen. My parents were completely obsessed with how things looked. Did the driveway look perfect? Did Gavin look innocent to the neighbors? Did the family look wealthy and successful? In the garage, absolutely nobody cared how things looked. They only cared if the engine fired up. They cared if the brake pads held. It was binary. It worked or it failed. There was zero room for emotional manipulation. You could not gaslight a blown transmission into shifting gears. The steel did not care about your feelings, and it certainly did not care about your father's bank account or his real estate portfolio. I buried myself in the grease and the grime. I worked 12-hour days. My hands bled, my knuckles were constantly skinned, my back ached. But my mind was completely clear for the first time in 22 years. I was building a fortress of actual, tangible skills. I was saving my salary, studying for my exams at night in the small room above the garage, and building a life out of the wreckage. But I knew the absolute silence from my parents' house was just the calm eye of the hurricane. Narcissists do not simply let their favorite punching bag walk away without a fight. Because without the scapegoat to blame for their miserable lives, they are forced to look at each other. And they absolutely hate what they see. I thought I was safe in the grime of the South Side. I thought the physical distance was enough to protect me. I was so incredibly wrong. The storm was coming, and it was driving a luxury vehicle right to my front door. I spent the next 3 months living in a world completely alien to the one I was raised in. My hands were permanently stained with black grease, the kind that settles deep into your cuticles and never truly washes out. My back ached with a deep, satisfying soreness every single night when I collapsed onto the small cot in the room above the garage. My bank account was slowly but steadily growing with honest money. I was no longer the designated scapegoat of a manicured suburban household. I was Julian, the lead apprentice mechanic at Garrett's Auto Repair. Under the relentless, barking mentorship of Bruce, our shop foreman, I learned how to tear down a transmission block and rebuild it entirely from memory. I learned the value of a hard day's work and the peace that comes from a quiet room. The silence from my family was a heavy, suffocating blanket at first. Every single time the main shop phone rang, a small, pathetic part of my inner child braced for Victor's booming voice demanding my immediate return. I expected a lawsuit. I expected the police. But the weeks bled into months, and the silence proved what I already knew deep down. They did not miss me as a son. They only missed the convenience of having someone to blame for their own miserable shortcomings. I thought the physical distance of the South Side was enough to protect me. I thought the grime and the poverty of the neighborhood would serve as a natural fortress against their country club aesthetics. I was completely wrong. Narcissists do not simply let their favorite punching bag walk away without a fight. When they lose total control of their false narrative, they panic. It was a blistering Tuesday afternoon in late August. The heat radiating off the cracked concrete lot was visible in thick, shimmering waves that distorted the horizon. I was lying flat on my back on a wooden creeper, completely slid underneath a massive 2010 Chevy Silverado work truck, wrestling with a stubborn, rusted catalytic converter. Sweat was pouring into my eyes, stinging with the grit of road salt and old oil. I was completely focused on the mechanical problem in front of me. Then I heard it, the distinct, purring rumble of a high-performance German engine. It did not belong here. The south side was a graveyard for beat-up sedans, rusted work trucks, and forgotten commuter cars. This engine sounded like pure, unadulterated arrogance. I grabbed my shop rag, wiped the sweat and grease from my brow, and rolled out from under the truck just in time to see a gleaming, midnight black Porsche Panamera pull directly into the center of our dusty lot. The driver parked horizontally, completely blocking two of our main customer service bays. My stomach plummeted. The anxiety hit the concrete floor harder than a dropped wrench. The driver's side door swung open, and Victor stepped out. He was wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than the Silverado I was just working on. He looked around the grease-stained lot with an expression of sheer, unmasked disgust, acting as if the very air was contaminating his pristine lungs. The passenger door opened a second later, and Helen emerged. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses and clutching her expensive leather purse to her chest like a protective shield against the working class. And finally, stepping out from the luxurious back seat, was Gavin. He was wearing a crisp white polo shirt, pristine sneakers, and that exact same arrogant smirk he wore the day he smashed my engineering project. They looked completely out of place. They looked like arrogant royalty visiting a slum for a quick photo opportunity before retreating to their castle. "Julian!" Victor's voice boomed across the lot, completely ignoring the other customers and mechanics who were staring at him. "Get out from under that heap of junk right now. We are leaving this instant." I did not scramble to my feet. I did not cower like I used to. I took my absolute time. I wiped my deeply stained hands on my red shop rag, stood up to my full height, and walked slowly toward them. I was covered in thick oil, my heavy coveralls were ripped at the knee, and my hair was matted with sweat. But as I stopped exactly 10 feet away from my father, I realized something incredible. I was no longer afraid of him. Stripped of his home turf, he looked small. "I am working on a customer's vehicle, Victor," I said, keeping my voice dangerously flat and even. "You are illegally blocking our active service bays. Customer parking is out on the street. Move the car." Victor's face instantly flushed that familiar, dangerous shade of purple. He took an aggressive step forward, his expensive leather loafers crunching loudly on the gravel. "Do not take that disrespectful tone with me, boy. You have had your little teenage tantrum. You ran away to your uncle's pathetic little shack to prove a point. Congratulations, your point is taken. Now get your bags. You are coming home right now. You are embarrassing this family with this poverty act." "I am not going anywhere with you," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest, planting my steel-toe boots firmly on the concrete. "And I do not have a home with you. You officially suspended me, remember? You gave me an indefinite sentence. I just decided to make it permanent." Helen stepped forward, pulling her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose to look at me with manufactured pity. "Julian, please, stop this ridiculous nonsense right now. Your brother misses you terribly. We miss you. You cannot just abandon your own blood family to go play in the dirt with Garrett. What will the neighbors think when they find out my son is a common laborer? They will probably think you finally drove your oldest son away with your toxic favoritism," I said coldly, not breaking eye contact with her. Gavin let out a loud, mocking laugh from beside the Porsche. "Look at you, Julian. You look like a literal janitor. God, this entire place smells like poverty and failure. Are you really going to throw away your entire life to change oil for minimum wage? Mom, Dad, just let him stay here. If he wants to be a complete loser, let him rot." Victor raised a hand, silencing Gavin instantly. He glared at me, his eyes narrowing into vicious slits. "I am not asking you, Julian. I am telling you as your father. Get in the car. If you refuse my generosity today, I will personally call the police and tell them you stole that college fund money from my office and ran away. I will have you arrested for grand theft." The sheer audacity of the threat took my breath away for a microsecond. He was openly threatening to accuse me of stealing my own money. Money he had actually stolen to cover Gavin's vandalism crimes. He was willing to ruin my life with a fake lawsuit just to force my submission. Before I could open my mouth to respond to his madness, a massive shadow fell over Victor from behind. "You make that phone call to the police, Victor, and I will gladly hand the responding officers the high-definition security footage of you trespassing and harassing my lead apprentice." Uncle Garrett stepped out from the darkness of the main bay. He was holding a massive 3-foot solid steel breaker bar in his right hand. He wasn't wielding it aggressively like a weapon. He was just leaning on it casually, but the violent implication was incredibly clear. Bruce stepped out right behind him, wiping his hands on a towel, his massive arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set like granite. Victor actually took a physical step backward. His corporate bravado instantly faltered when faced with two massive men who built engines and lifted steel for a living. "Stay out of this, Garrett. This is private family business. I am taking my son home where he belongs. He is not a piece of luggage you can just claim at the airport, Victor," Garrett said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed across the lot. "He is a grown man, and he works for me now. He earns an honest salary. He does not steal, he does not lie, and he does not throw temper tantrums to get his way, which is significantly more than I can say for the spoiled boy standing behind you." Gavin's arrogant smirk vanished completely. "Shut up, old man." Bruce took one single, heavy step forward, his boots hitting the pavement hard. Gavin actually flinched visibly and ducked behind Helen's shoulder like a frightened child. "You need to leave this property right now," I told Victor, my voice unwavering and loud enough for everyone to hear. "I am not coming back. I will never apologize to him for defending myself. I will never let you steal from my bank account again. You are not my father anymore. You are just a cruel landlord I used to rent space from." Victor stared at me. He looked at my grease-stained face, at the unyielding, protective wall of Garrett and Bruce, and finally up at the prominent CCTV camera mounted right above the garage door pointing directly at his Porsche. He realized, in that one agonizing moment of clarity, that he had absolutely zero leverage over me. He could not ground me. He could not cut off my cell phone plan. He could not threaten my college fund because he had already drained it dry. He had nothing left in his arsenal. "Fine," Victor spat, his face twisted in pure, unfiltered hatred. "If you want to live like a pathetic grease monkey for the rest of your miserable life, go right ahead. But do not ever come crawling back to my house when you inevitably fail. Do not ask me for a single dime when you are starving in the streets. You are cut off. You are dead to me." "I was dead to you the day Gavin was born," I said calmly. "Now get your car out of my service bay before I have it legally towed at your expense." Victor turned on his heel and marched back to the driver's side of the Porsche. Helen gave me one last, pathetic look of manufactured sorrow before scurrying after him, clutching her purse. Gavin flipped me off from the safety of the back seat as the luxury car reversed aggressively out of the lot, kicking up a massive cloud of dirt and gravel, and sped away down the cracked industrial street. I stood there for a very long time, watching the dust settle in the afternoon sun. I waited for the crushing weight of grief to hit me. I waited to feel like a lost orphan. But the only thing I felt was the incredible, weightless sensation of a massive, malignant tumor being surgically removed from my life. "You good, kid?" Bruce grunted, spitting a wad of sunflower seeds into the dirt. "Yeah, Bruce," I said, turning back toward the Silverado with a small smile. "I'm great. Let's get this converter off before closing." That confrontation was the absolute turning point of my entire existence. Stripped of the constant anxiety and emotional abuse, my mind expanded. Over the next few weeks, I poured every ounce of my energy into mastering the mechanical trade. I studied engineering textbooks late into the night, and that intense dedication paid off in a way none of us saw coming. A month later, a heavy flatbed tow truck pulled into our lot carrying a pristine, numbers-matching 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB. It was an absolute masterpiece of automotive history, worth millions. The owner, a man named Arthur Harrison, followed the tow truck in a sleek town car. Mr. Harrison was a local legend in the city, a ruthless commercial real estate developer. the CEO of a massive logistics corporation, and a notoriously demanding collector of classic European cars. He had just fired his previous high-end restoration shop because they had lazily used modern, non-period correct bolts on a suspension rebuild. He wanted absolute historical perfection, and he was willing to pay whatever it cost to get it. Garrett took the initial meeting in the office, but he walked out and handed the actual mechanical restoration project entirely to me. "It's your baby now, Julian. You know the motto. Do it right, not fast." For 2 straight months, I practically lived inside that Ferrari. I researched original factory schematics from the 1960s. I sourced incredibly rare, period-correct gaskets from overseas. I painstakingly rebuilt the massive V12 engine from the bare block up, tuning the 6 complex Weber carburetors by ear until they sang in perfect, aggressive harmony. I treated every single bolt, every wire, every leather seam with the kind of religious reverence I used to reserve for trying to please my parents. When Mr. Harrison finally arrived on a Saturday morning to inspect the finished project, the entire shop held its collective breath. He was a man who did not tolerate failure or excuses. He walked around the Ferrari in absolute silence for 20 agonizing minutes. He ran a white-gloved finger over the polished valve covers. He checked the panel gaps with a measuring tool. He sat in the driver's seat, adjusted the mirror, and turned the key. The V12 engine roared to life instantly, settling into a flawless, terrifyingly smooth idle that vibrated through the floorboards. Harrison stepped out of the car, pulled off his gloves, and looked directly at me. "You did the engine work on this vehicle, Julian?" he asked, his piercing blue eyes analyzing me like a balance sheet. "Yes, sir. Every single bolt," I replied, keeping my posture straight and my hands respectfully behind my back. Harrison nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. Most mechanics look at a car like this and just see a massive paycheck. They rush the job to get the invoice paid quickly. You looked at this car and saw a legacy. You have a profound gift for precision, son. It is incredibly rare in this generation. He turned to Garrett, who was standing quietly by the toolboxes. "I own a logistics company with a commercial fleet of 200 delivery trucks. I am currently locked in a terrible maintenance contract with a massive corporate dealership that overcharges me and consistently underdelivers on quality. I am terminating their contract today. I want your shop to take over the entire fleet maintenance account. It is a very large 6-figure contract annually." Harrison paused, looking back at me with a calculating gaze. "But my only strict condition is that Julian acts as the lead account manager. He oversees every single truck that rolls through these doors." Garrett's jaw practically hit the concrete floor. That single fleet contract would quadruple the shop's revenue overnight. It was life-changing, generational money. "We accept the terms," Garrett said, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion. He walked over and clapped a heavy, greasy hand on my shoulder. That night, long after the shop closed and we shared a cheap pizza in the cramped office, Garrett slid a stack of freshly printed legal documents across the desk toward me. "What is this?" I asked, wiping grease off my fingers with a napkin. "Official partnership agreement," Garrett said, taking a slow sip of his beer. 20% legal ownership of Garrett's Auto Repair, effectively immediately. Your name goes on the LLC, and when I finally retire to Florida, you buy me out and take the whole damn thing. You earned it, kid. You saved this shop." I stared at the dense legal paperwork. The letters blurred together through my tears. At 23 years old, I was no longer a terrified runaway with a paper envelope of cash. I was a legitimate business owner. I had built a real empire out of the wreckage my family left behind. I thought the absolute peak of my story was right there in that greasy office. I was so incredibly wrong. The universe was just getting started with the Turner family. The rapid, undeniable rise of my professional career was directly mirrored by the catastrophic, spectacular freefall of the Turner family. I didn't even have to actively seek out the information. It flowed to me naturally through the family grapevine, specifically through the loud mouth of Aunt Beatrice. Beatrice was Helen's younger sister, a woman whose entire personality revolved around gathering, exaggerating, and distributing scandalous neighborhood gossip. Once Beatrice found out through the community that I was a partial owner of a booming, highly lucrative mechanic shop, she suddenly found the time to call my cell phone. I let her talk, mostly because her updates were the greatest validation I could ever receive. It was like listening to the news report of a sinking ship I had safely evacuated. "Oh, Julian, it is an absolute disaster over there," Beatrice whispered dramatically over the phone one Tuesday evening while I was reviewing the payroll software in my new office. "You simply wouldn't believe it. Victor's real estate investments completely tanked. He thought he was a genius flipping commercial properties. But the market turned. He took out massive secondary mortgages on the main house just to cover Gavin's legal fees and try to keep up appearances for the country club. And now the bank just filed the official foreclosure paperwork. They are losing the house, Julian. The big beautiful house with the Persian rugs." I leaned back in my heavy leather office chair, staring at the ceiling tiles. The pristine, suffocating house where I was officially suspended was being repossessed by a bank. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "And Gavin?" I asked casually, clicking a pen against my desk. "Worse?" Beatrice gasped, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "You remember that ridiculous yellow Lamborghini Gavin was driving around? The one Victor bragged about buying him for getting into that expensive private college." "I remember," I said. "It was the same car permanently parked in the driveway while my Civic was banished to the street to protect property values." Here was the twist, the massive secret they had fought so hard to hide from everyone. It was a complete fraud. Beatrice practically squealed into the receiver. "Victor didn't buy it in cash like he told everyone. He leased it under his own name with a massive balloon payment he couldn't afford. When Victor missed 3 consecutive payments because of the foreclosure, the repo men showed up in the middle of the night and towed the Lamborghini right out of the driveway. The entire neighborhood watched. Gavin threw an absolute fit, screaming in the street in his pajamas. And then, well, the college administration found out about his vandalism charges because the victims filed a massive civil lawsuit. Gavin got expelled. He has no degree, no car, and a massive pile of debt." I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. The golden child was finally tarnishing. He was rusting away into nothing. But the collateral damage of his downward spiral was about to pull innocent people into the crossfire, and that was something I could not ignore. "And Julian, there is one more thing." Beatrice's voice dropped to a solemn, conspiratorial whisper. "Gavin got a girl pregnant. Her name is Claire. Sweet girl, works as a barista downtown. When she told Gavin the news, he completely abandoned her. Victor and Helen actually showed up at her job and threatened to sue her for defamation if she tried to claim the baby was his. They are treating her like absolute garbage." The dark humor instantly vanished from my body, replaced by a cold, familiar rage that burned in my chest. This was their exact playbook. They used people, destroyed them, and threatened them with legal ruin to protect their pristine image. I knew exactly what it felt like to be crushed under the weight of Victor's corporate bullying. I hung up with Beatrice, grabbed my keys, and drove straight to the coffee shop downtown. I found Claire sitting on a wooden bench outside the back alley, taking her 15-minute break. She looked exhausted beyond measure. She was visibly pregnant, maybe 6 or 7 months along, wearing worn-out sneakers and a faded green apron covered in coffee stains. Her eyes were red and swollen, shadowed by deep, dark circles of chronic stress. "Claire." I approached her gently, keeping my physical distance so I wouldn't startle her. She looked up, her tired eyes widening in immediate panic when she recognized my facial resemblance to Gavin. She instinctually wrapped her arms around her swollen stomach protectively. "Look, I already told your parents I don't want any trouble. I'm not asking for their money. Please just leave me alone. I can't take any more harassment." "I am not Gavin," I said softly, sitting on the far opposite end of the bench to give her space. "And I am definitely not my parents. My name is Julian. I am Gavin's older brother. They disowned me 2 years ago." Claire blinked, the sheer panic slowly subsiding into deep confusion. "Julian? You're the one they always talk about?" the violent one who stole from them and ran away. I let out a bitter, humorless laugh that sounded more like a cough. Is that the story they tell? No, Claire. I am the one who survived them. I am the one who got away. I heard what they are doing to you. I heard about the legal threats. She broke down. Right there on the busy downtown sidewalk, she buried her face in her rough hands and sobbed uncontrollably. She poured out the entire nightmare. Gavin had blocked her number across all social media the second she showed him the positive test. Helen had shown up at her tiny apartment, handing her a terrifying cease and desist letter drafted by a cheap strip mall lawyer, accusing Claire of extortion and threatening a massive lawsuit. I am working double shifts just to afford cheap diapers, prenatal vitamins, and a used crib, Claire cried, wiping her face with a paper napkin. I don't know what I am going to do. If they try to take my baby away in a custody battle just to spite me, I don't have the money to fight them in court. They have all the money and power. I looked at this terrified, pregnant girl, and I saw my own reflection from 2 years ago. I saw the desperate, trapped kid packing a duffel bag in the middle of the night, terrified of the future. But things were different now. I had money now. I had actual power. And I was absolutely not going to let the Turner family destroy another innocent life to protect their ego. They are not going to take your baby, Claire, I said, my voice vibrating with absolute, terrifying certainty. They are completely bankrupt. They are losing their house to the bank. They are bluffing with cheap legal paper to scare you into silence. I reached into my leather jacket and pulled out a heavy business card. It was thick, embossed cardstock. It belonged to Nathan, the ruthless, high-powered corporate lawyer who handled all the contracts for Mr. Harrison's logistics fleet. Nathan was a legal shark who billed $800 an hour. Take this. I handed her the card. Her hand trembled as she took it. You call Nathan tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. You tell him Julian sent you. He is going to represent you in the custody and child support hearings. He is going to draw up ironclad paperwork that strips Gavin of all parental rights while forcing him to pay child support through mandatory wage garnishment. Claire stared at the card, her hands shaking violently. Julian, I can't afford a corporate lawyer like this. I make minimum wage plus tips. You aren't paying him a dime, I said, looking her dead in the eye. I am paying his entire retainer, in full. Consider it my personal investment in my future niece's safety. You let Nathan handle the monsters in the courtroom. You just focus on being a good mother. Why are you doing this for me? She asked, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks. You don't even know me. Because absolutely nobody stood up for me when they were destroying my life, I said quietly, the old pain echoing in my voice. And because making Victor and Helen pay for their cruelty is the best return on investment I could ever ask for. The ensuing legal battle was completely one-sided. It wasn't a trial, it was a massacre. When Victor and Helen walked into family court a month later with their cheap attorney, expecting to easily bully a terrified barista into submission, they were met by Nathan. Nathan systematically dismantled their entire existence. He presented a mountain of documented evidence regarding Gavin's vandalism, his college expulsion, and Victor's impending real estate foreclosure to definitively prove they were a highly unstable and dangerous environment for a child. The judge was disgusted by the Turner family's behavior. The court granted Claire full sole legal and physical custody of baby Mia. Gavin was stripped of any visitation rights and ordered to pay a staggering amount of child support, which immediately pushed him into taking a grueling, low-paying warehouse job just to avoid going to jail for contempt of court. The Turner family was officially broken into pieces. They had lost their beautiful house. They had lost their luxury cars. They had lost their pristine reputation in the community. And they had lost all control over their golden child, who now blamed them for his ruined life. They were forced to move into a cramped, depressing 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown neighborhood not far from the city limits. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I was expanding my business operations, building a family of choice with people who actually loved me, and quietly funding a college savings account for my beautiful niece, Mia. I thought the universe had finally balanced the scales of justice. I thought the story was completely over. I didn't realize that the ultimate climax, the most brutally satisfying moment of my entire existence, was still waiting for me inside a corporate boardroom. For years passed since the night I walked out of that suffocating suburban house. I was 26 years old. The business partnership with Garrett had exploded in ways we never could have imagined in our wildest dreams. With the massive, steady cash flow from the Harrison Logistics contract, we had opened a second, state-of-the-art repair facility on the wealthy north side of the city. We employed 20 mechanics. I bought my own house, a beautiful, solid craftsman home with a wraparound porch that I meticulously restored with my own 2 hands on the weekends. And I met Grace. She was a brilliant, warm-hearted elementary school teacher who brought her Honda CR-V into my shop for a simple brake pad replacement. She didn't care about designer clothes or luxury cars. She loved my calloused hands. She loved my honesty and my work ethic. We were engaged to be married in the fall, and we were planning a small, intimate wedding with our chosen family. I had successfully built a fortress of absolute peace. But karma is a patient, meticulous architect, and it had one final blueprint to execute. It started with an unexpected phone call from Mr. Harrison. He asked me to come down to his corporate headquarters downtown to review the annual renewal of our massive fleet maintenance contract and to discuss a brand new venture. "Julian," Harrison said over the phone, his voice crisp and strictly professional, "I am officially opening a brand new classic car restoration division under the corporate umbrella. We have the space, but we need the talent. I want you and Garrett to run the mechanical operations. It will be a 50-50 partnership with Harrison Enterprises." I was completely floored. I had to sit down in my office chair. This was the holy grail of our industry. "I will be there at 10 tomorrow morning, Mr. Harrison. Thank you for the opportunity." "Excellent. We will finalize the paperwork." Harrison paused, his tone shifting slightly. "Oh, and Julian? I am personally interviewing candidates for a senior warehouse manager position tomorrow morning as well. It's mostly managing the logistics and parts inventory for the trucks you service. I might be a few minutes late to our meeting if the interview runs long. Just wait in the executive lobby." "No problem at all, sir. I'll see you tomorrow." The next morning, I walked into the towering glass and steel lobby of Harrison Enterprises. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit with a crisp white shirt, the first real, expensive suit I had ever purchased with my own money. I felt incredibly sharp. I felt powerful. I wasn't the grease-stained kid they kicked out anymore. I stepped off the silent elevator onto the executive floor, carrying a leather portfolio containing our financial projections. I walked down the carpeted hallway toward the plush waiting area outside the main boardroom, and there he was, sitting in a low-slung modern waiting chair, nervously clutching a wrinkled manila folder containing his resume, was Victor. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked at least 15 years older than his actual age. The tailored, expensive suits were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting, shiny polyester jacket that looked like it came from a discount rack at Walmart. His hair was significantly thinning, and the arrogant, puffed-out chest that he used to intimidate me had completely collapsed into a posture of sheer, undeniable defeat. He was desperate. He was broke. He needed this warehouse job to pay the rent on his miserable 2-bedroom apartment. Victor looked up from his folder. His tired eyes locked onto mine. For a long, painful second, he looked incredibly confused. He probably assumed I was there in a uniform to deliver a car part or fix the air conditioning in the building. "Julian?" he rasped, struggling to stand up from the low chair, his joints popping. What are you doing here?" I stopped in the center of the hallway. I looked at the man who had suspended me from my own home, the man who had stolen my college fund to protect a vandal, the man who told me I would starve in the streets. I searched my heart for anger, for hatred, for fear. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical pity. "Business, Victor," I said simply, not offering a handshake. "What are you doing here?" He nervously straightened his cheap tie, desperately trying to summon the ghost of his former corporate authority. "I am here for a final round interview for the senior logistics manager position. It is a highly critical executive role, very important to the supply chain. I knew exactly what that role was. I had read the job description on Harrison's desk months ago. It was not an executive role. It was essentially a glorified inventory clerk position, manually counting spark plugs, brake pads, and oil filters in a dusty, unair-conditioned warehouse. But I didn't correct his delusion. "Good luck," I said evenly. At that exact moment, the heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom swung open. Mr. Harrison stepped out, looking immaculate in a tailored suit, flanked by his executive assistant. "Julian, my star man," Harrison boomed enthusiastically, bypassing Victor completely and shaking my hand with genuine, warm respect. "I love what you did with the Q3 fleet efficiency estimates you sent over. You saved us 30 grand last month alone in preventative maintenance. Always glad to optimize the system, Arthur." I smiled warmly, returning the firm handshake. Harrison then turned his attention to Victor. His warm, friendly demeanor instantly vanished, replaced by the icy, calculating gaze of a CEO evaluating a low-level subordinate. "You must be Robert—" "Excuse me, Victor Turner, the applicant for the warehouse clerk job." Victor stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish out of water. He looked at Mr. Harrison's $1,000 suit. He looked at my tailored charcoal suit. He looked at the way Harrison's hand rested casually on my shoulder. A clear, undeniable display of mutual respect and partnership. "Yes, sir," Victor stammered, his voice trembling so badly he sounded like he was vibrating. "I didn't realize my son, worked for you." "Your son?" Harrison raised a silver eyebrow. He looked at me, feigning surprise perfectly. He was a brilliant, sharp man. He knew exactly what he was doing. "Julian, is this true? Is this the father you told me about? The one from the stories?" I looked at Victor. I saw the absolute panic, the naked terror in his eyes. He was silently begging me. He was pleading with his eyes for me to validate him, to cover for him, to save his pathetic ego in front of a billionaire CEO. He wanted me to play the role of the dutiful son one last time. This was the moment, the ultimate climax of our 26-year relationship. "Biologically speaking, yes," I said calmly, my voice carrying clearly through the silent executive lobby. "But we haven't spoken in 4 years. Not since he stole my college fund and kicked me out of his house for refusing to apologize to my brother." Victor let out a strangled, agonizing gasp. He physically recoiled as if I had shot him point-blank in the chest. Harrison nodded slowly, absorbing the information without a flinch. "I see. Well, Victor, let's not waste time. Have a seat inside." Harrison gestured into the massive boardroom. "Julian, you sit here on my right at the head of the table. Since this clerk position involves directly managing the parts inventory for Julian's repair shops, I think it is only fair that he sits in on the final interview. After all, Julian will be the one approving your daily audits and authorizing your performance reviews." The silence that followed was apocalyptic. Victor froze in the doorway. He looked at the massive mahogany table. He would have to sit in that chair and answer to me. He would have to report to the son he called a violent thug. He would have to submit his daily work to the boy he deemed unworthy of a family photograph. Every single day of his remaining working life, he would be forced to look at my massive success and his own pathetic failure. I saw his fragile, toxic ego violently battling his sheer survival instinct. He desperately needed the paycheck to avoid eviction. But could he swallow his pride enough to call me boss? Victor started, his face completely pale, sweat beading heavily on his forehead. "I don't think. It is a simple question, Victor," Harrison said coldly, checking his gold Rolex, projecting total impatience. "Are you qualified to manage Julian's inventory or not? Julian tells me he has a very strict standard for accuracy in his shops. 'Do it right, not fast,' I believe is his motto." Victor flinched visibly at the quote. He knew he had never taught me that. He knew Garrett had. He looked at me one last time. In his eyes, I saw the complete, devastating realization of everything he had permanently lost. He saw the respect, the power, and the peace I commanded. He could not do it. His narcissism simply would not allow him to bow to his victim. I can't, Victor whispered, his voice cracking into a sob. I withdraw my application. He turned around and walked toward the elevators. He didn't march. He shuffled. His shoulders were slumped. His head hung low, clutching his useless resume to his chest. He looked like a broken, hollow old man. Harrison watched him go until the elevator doors closed, then turned to me. Complicated family history? Very? I said, feeling a massive weight lift off my chest forever. Well, Harrison smiled, opening his leather folder and sitting down. His loss. Now, let's talk about our new 50/50 classic car division. Later that evening, I sat on the wraparound porch of my house with Garrett, drinking a cold beer. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. I told him exactly what happened in the boardroom. Garrett chuckled softly, shaking his head. You know, Julian, there is a massive secret about your father you need to know. Do you know why he hated me so much? Why he was so obsessed with looking rich and punishing you for wanting to work with your hands? Because you're a mechanic and it embarrasses him? I guessed. No, Garrett sighed, looking up at the evening sky. Because of your grandfather, my dad. Your grandfather built that auto shop on the south side from the ground up with his bare hands. When he died, everyone in the family assumed he would leave the business and the property to Victor, because Victor was the oldest. He was the golden child of his generation. But Grandpa left the entire shop and the commercial land to me. I stared at him, stunned. Why? Because he knew exactly who Victor was, Garrett said softly. He knew Victor would immediately sell the land, take the cash, and blow it all on fancy cars and fake investments just to look like a big shot to his country club friends. Grandpa knew I actually loved the mechanical work. He knew I would protect the legacy. He left Victor a lump sum of $50,000 in cash inheritance instead. What happened to the inheritance? Victor blew through every single penny of it in 2 years trying to start a luxury consulting firm that went completely bankrupt. Garrett took a sip of his beer. Your father hates me because I am the living, breathing proof that he is not the chosen one. And he hates you, Julian, because you remind him of exactly who he failed to be. You have the talent, the grit, and the integrity he always pretended to have. It all made perfect, terrifying sense. The projection, the jealousy, the manic need to control me. I wasn't just the family scapegoat. I was the mirror constantly reflecting his own massive failures back at him. The final chapter of my past arrived completely unannounced on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 4 years after the day I was officially suspended from my home. I was standing in the immaculate front office of our new Northside shop location. I was wearing a clean button-down shirt with my name embroidered over the pocket, looking over the architectural blueprints for our planned third location. The shop was humming with activity, the sound of air tools and classic rock playing in the background. The chime on the glass front door rang. I looked up from the blueprints and checked the security monitor on my desk. Standing in the lobby, dripping wet from the cold rain, was Victor. He looked incredibly frail. He was wearing a faded, cheap windbreaker and khaki pants that were frayed at the hems. The arrogance, the corporate bluster, was completely gone, washed away by years of grinding poverty and deep humiliation. I debated not going out there. I could easily send Bruce to throw him out. I could call the police and have him officially removed for trespassing on private property. But I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I wasn't angry anymore. The fiery rage that used to consume my thoughts had burned down to cold, gray ash. I was completely indifferent. I walked out of the comfortable office and into the brightly lit lobby. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice polite but completely devoid of any familial warmth. Victor slowly turned around. He looked at the pristine, high-tech shop. He looked at the expensive diagnostic equipment, the clean epoxy floors, and finally, he looked at me. He saw the word owner embroidered under my name. "Hello, Julian," he rasped, his voice trembling slightly. "Victor." I nodded slowly. maintaining my distance. Car trouble. No, he said, fidgeting nervously with his wet, wrinkled hands. I heard through Beatrice that you opened this new place. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. You've seen it? I said, crossing my arms over my chest. Is that all you wanted? He looked down at his cheap, waterlogged shoes. Your mother misses you. She cries every single day in the apartment. I'm sure she does, I said flatly, feeling no sympathy. But she made her choice when she stood there and watched you steal my money and kick me out. She chose Gavin. She chose the lie. At the explicit mention of the golden child, Victor flinched visibly. Gavin left, Victor said suddenly, his voice cracking with genuine, pathetic despair. He packed up his things and took off to Florida with some girl 8 months ago. We haven't heard a single word from him since. He left us with a mountain of credit card debt in our names that he forced us to co-sign. We have absolutely nothing left, Julian. We are drowning. I wasn't surprised in the slightest. The golden child had tarnished, rusted, and finally rolled away, leaving destruction in his wake. It was the exact monster they had built with their own hands. I'm sorry to hear that, I said politely, feeling absolutely nothing. Victor looked up at me, his eyes watery and red-rimmed. I was wrong, Julian. I waited. The silence stretched between us, heavy and absolute. I was wrong, he repeated, tears finally spilling over his wrinkled cheeks, mixing with the rain on his face. About the suspension, about the laptop, about the college fund, about everything. I see it all now. We bet on the wrong horse. We treated you terribly. We were so incredibly stupid. It was the apology I had violently fantasized about for years when I was a teenager. It was the ultimate validation, the admission of guilt I used to crave more than oxygen. But as I stood there in the lobby, listening to the words finally fall from his mouth, I realized something incredibly profound. It didn't fix the past. It didn't heal the scars. It didn't bring back the nights I spent crying in my room, wondering why I wasn't enough. It was just desperate words from a sad, lonely, bankrupt old man who finally realized he had driven away the only son who would have actually taken care of him in his old age. He wasn't apologizing because he felt bad. He was apologizing because he was out of options. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly, my voice softer now, but unyielding. He took a desperate step forward, his eyes lighting up with a pathetic glimmer of hope. Can we start over, Julian? I'm working the night shift at a grocery store stocking shelves. I'm trying to be better. Maybe you could come over to the apartment for dinner this Sunday? Bring Grace? We want to meet her. I looked at him. I felt pity, yes. It is a profound tragedy to see a human being reduced to this state. But I also felt a boundary rise up inside me. A boundary as solid and impenetrable as a reinforced concrete wall. No, Victor, I said gently, but with absolute, unwavering finality. We can't. Why? He pleaded, his voice breaking into a sob. I apologized. I admitted I was wrong. I'm your father. Because an apology doesn't magically regrow a relationship you actively poisoned for 2 decades. I said, looking him dead in the eye, my voice carrying the weight of years of therapy and healing. I forgive you, Victor. I really do. I forgive you so I don't have to carry the heavy poison of hating you anymore. I forgive you for my own peace. But forgiving you does not mean I am going to let you back in. I have a beautiful life now, peaceful, happy one, and I will absolutely not risk my peace to fix your mistakes. Victor stood there for a very long time. The tiny spark of hope slowly drained out of his eyes, leaving behind only the stark, cold reality of the bed he had made for himself. He realized the door was closed forever. He nodded, a slow, resigned, heavy nod. You turned out good, Julian, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain hitting the glass doors. You turned out far better than we ever deserved. I know, I said. He turned around, pushed open the heavy glass doors, and walked out into the pouring rain. I watched him trudge across the parking lot, his shoulders hunched against the cold. He got into a rusted, beat-up sedan that was far worse than the Civic he used to mock, and slowly drove away. I never saw him again. I never went to his funeral years later. I never looked back. I walked back into my warm office. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Grace, asking if I wanted to get Thai food for dinner and reminding me that she loved me. A moment later, Bruce popped his head in to complain about a late parts delivery, and Garrett yelled from the main bay that Mia, my beautiful niece, had sent a crayon drawing of a race car in the mail. Life moved forward, vibrant and full of love. The suspension that was supposed to trap me in a cycle of abuse and compliance had actually set me completely free. The words, "all right," had been the magic key to unlocking my cage. I stood by my office window, looking out at the massive fleet of commercial trucks I maintained, the incredible business I built with my own two hands, and the bright, unwritten future stretching out before me. I had lost a toxic family, yes, but I had finally found myself. And that is a trade I would make 1,000 times over. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic blood relatives to save your own sanity and build your own life? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Your stories matter, and your peace is worth protecting.